Well, shalom, everybody. you know, uh, a couple of the goals of this three-part presentation on the Kingdom of Elohim was to learn together that any kingdom is a place where someone actually rules. And whoever that ruler is has absolute authority to command what he pleases. So too shall be the kingdom of Elohim, to be ruled by Yahweh slash Yeshua HaMashiach. And when he shall rule over his kingdom, there shall be no such thing as my way versus his way. His way shall be law. And so today we shall discuss part 3, the conclusion to what is the kingdom of Elohim. Hopefully you were with us as we identified the king of this kingdom and what he shall be king of in part 1, and then we discuss what the word of Elohim, which is the Bible, teaches us about his government in part 2. We now should know what the kingdom of Elohim represents. It's all about future rule. And all those who shall rule in the kingdom shall be spirit beings, because we know that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom. That is according to the word of Elohim. And yet any kingdom includes those over whom a king and his government shall rule, right? Now, there's an obvious, and what I hope we see as an implicit conclusion is that Yahweh slash Yeshua HaMashiach shall rule over all of those saints that shall rise in the first resurrection to reign with him during his 1,000-year rule on this earth. And yet, there shall be flesh and blood people that shall also be on the earth during this reign. These shall make up the primary subjects of the kingdom of Elohim. In essence, Yeshua HaMashiach and his saints shall rule over these other subjects that we're about to study. Now, the word of Elohim is not silent about these. In fact, the word of Elohim has much to say about a particular specific family of people who shall exist during the time of this kingdom. So today in this conclusion, we shall provide an overview about this family and others who shall be subject to those who we now know shall rule with the kings in this kingdom. Who shall this family be, and who shall these others be? We've given some hints about this family, so you probably know where we're headed. And of course, if you like what you're reading, hearing, and learning, please hit that like button and follow us on Elohim's Workshop as we join that community of others just seeking to grow in the truths of the word of Elohim. So now, our first clue about this special family of subject came as we read the following verses in part 1. So let's read. Luke chapter 1 verse 33, and he shall reign over the house of Yaakov forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. We now know that the house of Yaakov is Israel. His name was changed by the translators first to Jacob, and in the New Covenant they changed it to James. The angel Gabriel prophesied to Miriam that her son Yeshua shall rule over the house of Israel forever. But we also know that the government that shall rule and judge with him over the house of Israel shall begin with the resurrected David and Yeshua's 12 apostles, that is, according to the word of Elohim. At the same time, we must not become complacent about the other germane truths we also know, such as Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 9, and Yahweh shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Yahweh, and his name one. We must always remind ourselves that according to the word of Elohim, Yahweh gave up his glory and his name temporarily to come into the earth and inhabit a body of flesh and blood under the name and title of Yeshua HaMashiach, whom the world calls Jesus Christ. This same Yahweh Elohim shall not only reign over the house of Israel forever, he should also reign over the entire earth, all the earth. However, the plan of salvation has been so carefully crafted by the two omnipotent spirit beings who are the spirit family of Elohim to allow subtle falsehoods to be taught throughout the history of mankind, so that called out ones, even beginning with Abel, who was the son of Adam, could be segregated from others who choose to refuse, whether through ignorance or desire, to accept the teachings of Yahweh Elohim as given to the prophets of Israel and the apostles of Yeshua HaMashiach. We know that the reign of Yahweh / Yeshua HaMashiach shall begin with an event called the first resurrection after he returns to the earth. And yet there should be also another event so powerful that has been veiled to those who have been overcome by false teachings in the world. And sadly, this veiling includes even many called out ones who have been deceived by members of other cultures who have inserted their own agendas into the word of Elohim. We learned in part 1 that the throne of David shall lie vacant until he comes whose right it is. We know that that someone shall be the branch of righteousness, none other than Yahweh, whose name is now Yeshua HaMashiach. When he returns, another great event shall also occur. And to get right to the point, we read in part 1 what the prophet Isaiah was commissioned to teach us about certain signs that shall be in place when the branch of righteousness shall appear in the earth. You know, these signs include the following. The wolf shall dwell with the lambs. We read that in Isaiah 11:6. Number 2, the cows and bears shall feed together, Isaiah 11:7. 3, the lion shall eat straw, Isaiah 11:7. Little children shall play in the holes of asps, which are vipers with snouts, verse 8 of Isaiah 11. And there shall be no hurt or destruction in Yahweh's holy mountain, which shall be Jerusalem and the surrounding land of Israel, while at the same time the earth shall be full of the knowledge of Yahweh, Isaiah 11:9. Any human being who is honest with oneself would acknowledge that none of these signs exists in the world of modernity where we now exist. In fact, based on what we know, these have never existed on the earth during man's existence. Thus, if these signs are yet future, the prophecies that immediately followed these signs are yet future. Let's connect the dots. Isaiah 11, verse 11. And it shall come to pass in that day, Yahweh shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. The prophet writes of a period of time he calls in that day. What day is he writing about? He's writing of the time when the events of verses 1 through 10, which we just read, shall appear on the earth. A time when the branch of righteousness shall appear with all the accompanying signs we just read about. It shall be when this branch, who is also Shiloh, who is also Yahweh, who is also Yeshua HaMashiach, shall appear, and only when he shall appear, that the children of Israel, who are now scattered throughout all the nations of the earth, where they are the tails and not the heads. You can read that in Deuteronomy 28:13. They shall be recovered and returned to their land. When those signs appear, that's what's going to happen. Note that the nations from which the children of Israel shall be recovered include the Hamite nations, that's African nations of Egypt, Pathros, and Ethiopia, which is Cush, as well as the European-controlled islands of the sea. Verse 12. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Yehudah from the four corners of the earth. verses 10 through 12 simply describe the return of both houses of the children of Israel to their land when the branch of righteousness shall return to claim his throne, David's throne. Verse 16, and there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, like as it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt. Wherever the children of Israel shall exist, when this day comes, Yahweh shall provide the way for their return to their land. And we need to understand that this is not impartial. Every member of the remnant of the children of Israel that shall exist on the earth when Yahshua HaMashiach returns, that were not in the first resurrection, shall be returned from the nations of the earth from which they were scattered. And that shall occur in that day. Now, you can read my article, In That Day, The Return of Israel, which walks through the writings of 12 prophets who teach of this future event called In That Day, who all wrote of the return of the children of Israel to their land. Then judge for yourself whether or not the true children of Israel have returned to their land during modernity. One of these prophets, the prophet Ezekiel, was commissioned to detail this great event. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 20 and verse 34. And I will bring ye out from the people, and will gather you out of the countries wherein you are scattered, with a mighty hand, and with a stretched out arm, and with fury poured out. You see, wherever the children of Israel now exist, they have become citizens of the countries where they have been scattered. Some have found a measure of material success, and that's individually, while nationally they are the tail wherever they exist. Sadly, most of their pastors have studied in the seminaries of the very people who enslaved them, and they have taught their people to follow the paths of those nations rather than learn the teachings of Yahweh as taught to the prophets of Israel and the apostles of Yeshua HaMashiach. When this day shall come, in that day the children of Israel shall not leave these nations willingly. They shall become a little comfortable, in fact, a lot comfortable. Thus it shall be with a mighty hand that Yahweh shall return them to their land. Now I want you to ask yourself the question, has anything like this we read in Isaiah 11 and here in Ezekiel 20 ever occurred on the earth yet? Do the lions eat straw? Well, if not, the true children of Israel have not returned to the land. Verse 35, and I will bring you into the wilderness of the people, and there will I plead with you face to face. Verse 36, like as I pleaded with your fathers in the wilderness in the land of Egypt, so will I plead with you, saith Adonai Yahweh. When the remnant of the children of Israel that shall exist on the earth in that day shall be recovered by Yahweh / Yeshua HaMashiach, they shall be brought into the wilderness, somewhat as they were delivered from Egypt. When this happens, Yahweh shall plead with them to return to his commandments, statutes, and laws. Remember, they are the only family in the earth that he has proclaimed that he knows. Thus they shall be the first of those flesh and blood mankind on the earth in that day that shall be given this opportunity. Drop down to verse 37 now. And I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. This rod is Yahweh himself and all that he represents. You know, some say that the bond of the covenant is the old covenant that began with Abram, and that may be true, but there's also something called the covenant of peace that he's going to have with his people. That's why we read about all these animals that will no longer be eating flesh and blood, but the lions shall be eating straw. It's a covenant of peace that shall be in existence when they return to the land. Now remember, Yahweh was the first king. He shall announce himself as their only king upon his return. Of course, with David ruling upon them. And remember, a kingdom is not a democracy. It shall be his way or no way. Verse 38. And I will purge out from among you the rebels and them that transgress against me, and I will bring them forth out of the country where they sojourn, and they shall not enter into the land of Israel, and ye shall know that I am Yahweh. So many shall not accept what they shall learn under the rod. They shall be purged and not allowed to enter into the land of Israel. Again, have you seen this occur? I ask these sarcastic questions because of how so many of my brothers and sisters of both Israelite and Gentile origins who have been deceived about the true identity of the children of Israel in modernity. This is what shall happen when the children of Israel are returned to their land by Yahweh, that is, according to the word of Elohim. Obviously, this has yet to happen. Now, in Zechariah chapter 13, verses 8 through 9, we learn that 2/3 of the children of Israel brought into the wilderness shall die there and not be allowed back into their land. Only a remnant of the remnant shall actually enter into the land. And briefly, returning to the prophet Isaiah, for those who shall be allowed to enter into the land in that day, this shall be their sentiments. Isaiah chapter 12 and verse 1. And in that day thou shalt say, O Yahweh, I will praise thee. Though thou wast angry with me, thine anger is turned away, and thou comfortest me. Metaphorically, these are the words of the children of Israel who shall make it back to their land during the millennial reign of Yahweh/Yeshua HaMashiach. Verse 2. Behold, Elohim is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for Yahweh, is my strength and my song, and he also is become my salvation. Notice the title/name, Yahweh. I think in the original it says something about Jehovah, but when you look at the Hebrew, it is Yahweh. Now, the word of Elohim teaches us that there are actually two Yahs, Yahweh and Yeshua, who are the omnipotent family of Elohim. You can check out my article, What's in a Name? Understanding the Biblical Presentations of Lord and God, in all caps. It walks through this and other details of some of the significant Hebrew names the European translator has changed to either titles such as the Lord and God in all caps, or God with a capital G, and other names such as Yaakov, which they changed to Jacob and James. Now, continuing in Isaiah chapter 12 and verse 3. Therefore with joy shall you draw water out of the wells of salvation. Notice that, water out of the wells of salvation. It's talking about the word of Elohim. That's the wells of salvation. Verse 4. And in that day shall you say, praise Yahweh, call upon his name, declare his doings among the people, make mention that his name is to be exalted. The name, if you look at the translation, they call it praise the Lord. That's not a name. But look what he says. Call upon his name. Praise him. Praise Yahweh. Call upon his name. Not a title. The Lord. Declares doings among the people. Makes mention of his name. That his name is to be exalted. And then in verse 5, sing unto Yahweh, for he had done excellent things. This is known in all the earth at that time. The works of Yahweh shall be known in all the earth at this future time of the return of the children of Israel to their land. Verse 6, cry out and shout, thou inhabitant of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel in the midst of thee. This salvation is to the nation of the children of Israel. It is primarily a physical form of salvation, but it can lead to spiritual salvation for individuals who learn their lessons. So it's a physical form of salvation at that time, which the remnant of the nation shall receive through their return to the land where they shall dwell in safety. Do you remember when Yeshua HaMashiach told the doubting Pharisees that the kingdom was in their midst? Well, in that day, the king shall be in the midst of the children of Israel, but in full power to execute judgment not only of the returned children of Israel, but of the entire earth. Notice what the prophets Jeremiah and Zechariah wrote about this future time. Jeremiah chapter 33 and verse 60. In those days shall Yehudah be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell safely. And this is the name wherewith they shall be called, Yahweh our righteousness. And then Zechariah 14:11. And men shall dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. Is Jerusalem dwelling in safety and modernity? Of course not. Brothers and sisters, if these events we have read in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Zechariah cannot be seen in the land of Israel in modernity, the true members of the children of Israel have not been returned to their land. If you disagree, what you are challenging are the words we are reading, not me. I am simply quoting the word of Elohim. Let's go back to Ezekiel chapter 37 and verse 22. Look what it says. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. And they shall no more be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore at all. You know, because of Solomon's transgressions, the children of Israel were split into two nations. Israel had 9 tribes and Yehudah 3 tribes. Because they disobeyed Yahweh and their Elohim, Israel was taken from their land by the Assyrians. Yehudah was taken from their land by Babylon, but in order to fulfill prophecy, a remnant of both were allowed to return to the land. And that remnant was primarily from Yehudah, but all the nations were present at that time. They had to be to fulfill prophecy. Now, these were they that were in the land when Yahweh came in the flesh unto his own. His disciples, the apostles, were a part of this remnant. However, eventually all of these were scattered throughout the nations of the earth, where they remain even until this very day. And when these return to the land, the two nations shall once again be one. And then notice what shall happen in verse 23. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will save them out of their dwelling places, wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their Elohim. Does this exist in modernity? The answer should be obvious. And when they return, they shall be given a king, David, and the apostles of Yeshua HaMashiach shall judge them. Let's go back to chapter 20 in verse 40. For mine holy mountain, in the mountain of the height of Israel, saith Adonai Yahweh, there shall be all the house of Israel, all of them in the land, serve me. There will I accept them, and there will I require your offerings. The sacrificial laws for them shall return. They are not under the blood of Yeshua, for those who are interested. And the first fruits of your oblations with all your holy things. Verse 41. I will accept you with with your sweet savor, when I bring you out from the people, and gather you out of the countries wherein ye have been scattered, and I shall sanctify you. I shall rather be sanctified in you before the heathen. We're going to read a little bit more about that in a second. Verse 42. And ye shall know that I am Yahweh, when I shall bring you into the land of Israel, into the country for which I lifted up my hand to give it to your fathers. You know, 12 prophets wrote about this return of the children of Israel to their land. The prophet Ezekiel was commissioned to write more of the details of that return. It should be those children of Israel who survive the ride that shall enter into the land when Yeshua returns to claim his kingdom and to bring forth his saints in the first resurrection. So the remnant of the children of Israel shall be returned to the land during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua and his saints, to have David resurrected to be their king and the 12 apostles judging over them. Thus we now know beyond a shadow of doubt that the children of Israel shall be the immediate flesh and blood subjects of the kingdom of Elohim. However, there shall be others. Let's connect the dots on these others. Now, immediately preceding the return of Yahweh shall be something called the day of Yahweh's vengeance. Some just call it the day of Yahweh. It's his vengeance upon the nations. 9 prophets and 2 apostles wrote about this day of Yahweh. It is also called the Great Tribulation. In fact, look what the apostle Yochanan also wrote about this. Look at Revelations chapter 1 and verse 9. I, Yochanan, who am also your brother and companion in tribulation, and in the kingdom and patience of Yeshua HaMashiach, was in the isle that is called Patmos, for the word of Elohim, and for the testimony of Yeshua HaMashiach. So Yochanan was committed to the isle of Patmos, towards the end of his life for the word of Elohim and the testimony of Hamashiach. In verse 10, I was in the spirit on Yahweh's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. He writes that he was in the spirit on Yahweh's day, translated the Lord's day. It testifies that what is called Yahweh's day in the New Covenant is the same day as the day of Yahweh written of by the prophets. And this is why the events in the book of Revelations represent a lot of the same events the prophets wrote about the day of Yahweh. And let's go read at least one example of this day as written by the prophets. Okay? Like I said, 9 of them wrote about this, but look what Isaiah wrote in chapter 13 and verse 9. Behold, the day of Yahweh cometh, both cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. Verse 10, for the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. Verse 11, and I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. The day of Yahweh represents a future time when Yahweh shall punish the nations of the world for their treachery against the people of Yahweh, the children of Israel, and for their wickedness and idolatry upon the earth. Those who wrote of it consistently mentioned the darkening of the sun and moon at that time. Now notice how the apostle Yochanan was shown this great event in a vision. Revelations 9:14 and 15. Saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Verse 15. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. Verse 16. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. I heard the number of them. Yahweh shall use an army of 200 million soldiers to kill a 3rd part of all men on the earth in that day. The prophet Yoel teaches us that this shall be Yahweh's army. You can read that in Yoel or Joel, whichever you want, chapter 2 and verse 11. Verse 17. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. You know, Yochanan was not familiar with the weaponry of modernity's warfare, so he described this vision as best he could. And verse 18, by these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. This shall be the result of this great future war that shall come upon the earth as Yahweh punishes the nations. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, we may be seeing the initial setup for those right before our very eyes as the powers of mankind prophesied, the prophesied participants are beginning to establish their turfs. After this great event, the word of Elohim teaches us about the members of the nations who shall survive this day. Let's go to the prophet Zechariah, chapter 14 and verse 16. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now we learn in Ezekiel chapter 38:14 through chapter 39:24. Again, Ezekiel chapter 38:14 through chapter 39:24, that towards the end of the day of Yahweh, Yahweh shall bring those nations called by the names of Gog and Magog against his land and the children of Israel, so that he shall magnify and sanctify himself. The house of Israel shall be tasked with burying their bodies for 7 months to cleanse the land. These are their survivors, the survivors of Gog and Magog, that shall exist during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua and his saints, and go up from year to year to bow down to Yahweh, the King, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. During this time, all that survive the day of Yahweh must bow down to Yahweh and keep this feast, which is the 7-day feast, not to include the 8th day. We also learned this in Ezekiel chapter 45 and 25. That is the 7-day feast, not the 8th day. And we're going to discuss this great feast in great part when we go to part 7 of our presentation on Yahweh's appointed time, which shall follow this presentation. Verse 17, and it shall be, whosoever will not come up of the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. Verse 18 and 19, and if the family of Egypt go not up, and come not, they have none, no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith Yahweh will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. You see how important it's going to be during that 1,000 years, right? Verse 19, this shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Wow, why is the Feast of Tabernacles not taught about in modernity's Christianity? Oh well. In that day, failure for members of the nations to go up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles to worship the King shall result in severe punishments during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua and his saints. We further seeing how that it is impossible for the kingdom of Elohim to be in existence in modernity. It shall not be a democracy. They all have the power to choose who and what one wants to accept and obey. Not so once the kingdom of Elohim shall exist on the earth, that is, according to the word of Elohim. Yahweh/Yeshua HaMashiach shall be king over all the earth. So let's continue to connect the dots on those who shall be subjects in the kingdom. Go to Zechariah chapter 8 and pick it up at verse 21. And the inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, let us go speedily to pray before Yahweh and to seek Yahweh of hosts. I will go also. Verse 22. Yea, many people and strong nations shall come to seek Yahweh of hosts in Jerusalem to pray before Yahweh. And verse 23. Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, in those days shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of the language of all the languages of the nations, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, we will go up with you, for we have heard that Elohim is with you. The status between Israel and the other nations during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua it's a subject into itself, y'all. Obviously, during the time of the kingdom of Elohim, the nations shall finally know who the true Israelites are and seek to follow them. So together with the remnant of the children of Israel, the members of the other nations who shall survive the day of Yahweh shall be subjected to the rule of Yahweh, Yahshua HaMashiach, and his saints. Now we know who the subject shall be under the rule of Yahshua: David, the 12 apostles, and the saints who shall take part in the first resurrection. And yet, what all saints must never do is to think or teach is that those who have not been called out and accepted the truth of the word of Elohim at this time have no hope. The word of Elohim provides a measure of guidance as to the fate of all who shall take part in the second resurrection of judgment, which includes all those who were the subjects of the kingdom of Elohim. So let's connect those dots briefly. We read Revelations 20 through 5, where the rest of the dead lived not until the 1,000 years were finished. This represents all mankind other than those who shall be in the first resurrection, right? So let's briefly read about their fate, starting with Revelations chapter 20 and verse 12. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before Elohim, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. The books that shall be opened are the books of the word of Elohim, your Bible. The book shall be open. The fact that the book shall be open means that the minds of those who shall rise in this second resurrection shall finally be open to understand the truths contained within these books for the first time. Verse 13. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they will judge every man, again, according to their works. These words simply describe the second resurrection to judgment that Yeshua spoke of in Yochanan chapter 5 and verse 29. Yochanan, know him as John. Most of these were veiled to these inherent truths because they were not previously called out, perhaps because they were not strong enough to walk in whatever truth they may have heard because it ran contrary to what was popular, perhaps because of the deceits of the world were so subtle and enticing, etc., etc., etc. This also is a subject for a future presentation. Now we're simply summarizing the words we are reading together. Those in the second resurrection shall be given an amount of time to either accept or reject the truths contained in these books, and shall be judged by the words of these books according to their works. We read that together, people. The fact that they shall be judged by their works implies that they shall be given some time to exhibit their works before Elohim. And, there's been a lot of speculation on how much time shall be given. Frankly, I don't know. However, I want you to consider how much time we have been given to showcase our works before Elohim. Just a thought. To be quite honest, the word of Elohim, your Bible, is mostly concerned with the children of Israel and those called out of this world to Yeshua HaMashiach. Very few details are provided about this second resurrection other than what we are reading. Verse 14, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And verse 15, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So verse 15 teaches us that of these who are part of the second resurrection, all whose names are not found at that time written in the book of life shall be cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death. Now, if your name is found in the book of life prior to the first death, which we all are going to experience, you should be part of the first resurrection. The books have already been opened to you. You did what was required and inherited the promise of eternal life. You know what the Feast of Tabernacles, that it exists and that it is to be obeyed. You know it. Others do not, unfortunately. Inherently, we are learning that not only was the understanding of the books not open to those who shall be a part of the second resurrection, which is to judgment, the fact that the book of life shall also be open at that time is teaching us that it is open to receive additional names of those whose work shall be acceptable unto Elohim at that time. And as such, and although these shall not reign with Yeshua and his saints during the 1,000-year kingdom of Elohim, they shall not suffer the second death. The inherent conclusions are that they too shall receive spirit bodies at that time. I say this because remember that when the new Jerusalem and the Father shall show up on the earth, come down from heaven, there shall be no more death. Hopefully, this presentation has truly opened the eyes of many to see that the kingdom of Elohim is yet to come. It shall be the culmination of a series of powerful events, some that have occurred, yet most that have yet to occur. And then Yahweh has given us 8 appointed times that teach us of the plan of Elohim that Yahweh and Yeshua design and shall carry out to culminate in what we have read in these 3 parts about the kingdom of Elohim. What we shall now focus on is the journey that all who have been called out must travel in order to reign with Yeshua in his kingdom. And that is what Yahweh's appointed times are all about. I know that there are many who have watched this presentation who were previously knowledgeable of what we have read together. To you, I pray I have upheld the proper standard for teaching these words. To those who are new to what we have read, I hope and pray you receive some understanding about the kingdom of Elohim that shall enhance your spiritual walk. So join us next week as we begin to finally connect the dots in our 8-part series on the appointed times of Yahweh. That's going to be quite exciting. Part 1 is the Sabbath, the beginning to an end. And in this 8-part series, we shall show how these appointed times provide both a weekly and annual opportunity for called out ones to periodically refuel so that they may continue to endure until the end during their annual journey through life that begins with their commitment to enter into a covenant relationship with Yahweh/Yeshua HaMashiach. This endurance shall be fulfilled with called out ones entering into the kingdom of Elohim upon their being raised from the dead to spiritual bodies during the resurrection to life, the first resurrection, and it shall occur in that day. Again, I am Donald Croswell, and if you appreciate what we've read together, kindly hit the like button and follow us at Elohim's Workshop. And I encourage and invite any comments and or questions. And as usual, additional articles and lessons that provide far greater details on these and other biblical subjects can be found at www.elohimsworkshop.com. Shalom, brothers and sisters.